Take a look and reflect on some of the political highlights of the year. And joining me for that reflection, Rebone Tau, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, Professor Dirk Kotze, Levy Ndou, also with us tonight. You're a part of this conversation. What sticks out for you as far as political highlights? 072-110-5584. I suppose in politics in 2021, the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma carries with it a lot of important political lessons that we need to dissect. Let's reflect on that. July 7th was a very important day. Just before midnight, President Zuma handing himself over to the police. Was this a failure of our institutions or a failure of politics? Watch what Judge Khampepe said during the court hearing of that matter.
Declared that Mr. Jacob Zuma is guilty of the crime of contempt of court for failure to comply with the order made by this court in Secretary of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector. The majority judgment orders an unsuspended sentence of imprisonment for a period of 15 months. Mr. Jacob Zuma is ordered to submit himself to the South African Police at Nkandla Police Station or Johannesburg Central Police Station within 5 calendar days from the date of this order.
Well, that's what the courts said as they were handing down judgment in that matter. Rebone, Levi, the professors, good evening. Thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, let's start with you. The way in which the Constitutional Court handled this case, it was as if the courts were unfazed by the possible political consequence of this particular decision. Did it send the right message to politicians in the country about our institutions?
Well, I think it was about more than politicians. It was about our democracy. It was about the constitutional democracy that we claim to be. So I would like to read it in that wider scheme of things and not merely in relation to the politicians, as it were. Of course, it is no small matter that a head of state after democracy is sent to jail and sentenced to go to jail. It's a huge matter. It's perhaps one of the biggest things that have happened during this year. I think we should be glad that the courts would continue to do their job without worrying about politics, even though politics are important. But I think you are going down a slippery slope as a country when your courts think of politics more than they think of the law. And I think in this case, that's what they tried to do. Of course, not everyone will agree with them.
Now, of course, if I'm correct, former President Jacob Zuma is the first prisoner of the Constitutional Court, and certainly the first prisoner, as you mentioned, of a country that he once led. I mean, I suppose there are important learnings that need to come out of this. I mean, former President Jacob Zuma really did think that he would defy the courts because he really believed that they were wrong. Prof. Dirk Kotze, were the institutions wrong here or were the politics wrong here?
No, I think neither were wrong to a large extent. I think what we've seen here is that it is unique. It was unique in the sense that the Constitutional Court was a court of first instance. So it wasn't a court that listened to an appeal from of a lower court, like the Supreme Court of Appeal or a higher court or so on. So in that sense, yes, it was quite unique. It's not an absolute unique. There were other cases like this also, but there are very few. And in the case of President Zuma, it was obviously a very high-profile situation, a high-profile case. I think what is significant about this case is that it was obviously a very highly politicized situation. So politics were present everywhere in this situation and in this case. And the statements that President Zuma made in public during the time of this court case, when it appeared before the Constitutional Court, was extensive in its criticism of the legal system in general and judiciary, and specifically the Constitutional Court. And the fact that the Constitutional Court made this pronouncement, reached this judgment, I think was then lauded at that time as a victory for the rule of law. And I think the question is whether, with hindsight, whether we still agree with that. And I think from my point of view, that is indeed the case. It established the rule of law, the judiciary, the Constitutional Court specifically, and enhanced its position, and in a sense sort of put its foot down and said, well, despite all the politics around this, despite the challenges from an important person like President Zuma, we still had to ultimately make our judgment in terms of our own considerations. Now, we know what has happened since then, but the point is that I think that established or recovered some of the losses of the judiciary and especially the Constitutional Court in terms of the authority, in terms of the legitimacy in the eyes of some people, and also the fact that all of us should realize that we must take these courts very seriously.
Well, Rebone, Zuma's allies would argue, in fact, the Zuma faction at large still maintains up till this day that this arrest was highly political and targeted, and they question the legitimacy of the judiciary, saying the judiciary is compromised. Is the country's democracy and judiciary strong enough to withstand the effects of a JZ imprisonment, right? And we are talking now a possibility of him returning to jail with the latest ruling from the Gauteng High Court. But, I mean, is our judiciary able to withstand his imprisonment?
I mean, one must start by saying that we have to also go back to the Nkandla saga. If you remember, at the time, it had to be the Crown Court that said that he should pay back the money, you know. So, and politically, I think the ANC has failed, you know, in a sense of when he was the president, you know, they had a notion of collective responsibility instead of dealing with some of the issues that were happening in the state that were wrongdoings. But I think the judiciary system, based on the latest, as you are saying, outcomes of the High Court, you know, saying that what's this word? The
medical parole.
The medical parole that was granted was not within. And we know that, okay, the department had said now they will appeal the matter. So we're looking at that. But I think at this present moment, we do not even see this coming, that the High Court will say actually the medical parole was illegal, you know, in the first place. You know, so it shows that the judiciary continues to maintain its order.
Levi, I mean, if you ask Zuma's camp, they still maintain today that one man's refusal to bow to the supremacy of what they call white monopoly capital law will shut this country down. Firstly, are you surprised at the audacity of his supporters to think that way? But secondly, I mean, if you look at the unrest that ensued in July, cost the country 35 billion rands, it is estimated. 25,000 members of the military had to be released. I mean, did they successfully shut the country down?
Well, I think the strategy to defy the decision of the court and to create disruptions was properly planned, and they were actually quite successful. There were talks just before Zuma could be arrested that indeed his supporters were saying that they are actually going to ensure that certain wrong things do happen in South Africa. And they indeed happened. Whether the state securities or those that are given the responsibility to maintain law and order did not know about it or not, it's not a factor now. The fact of the matter is that the majority of South Africans were aware that if Jacob Zuma is arrested and goes to prison, something is going to happen, and indeed that happened. But the decision that was taken by the courts, for me, was firstly a test for our constitutional democracy. Indeed, there were instances where the judges felt intimidated, and from a point of view of a person who is just an onlooker, what a spectator wanted to see whether indeed it is possible for the judges in South Africa that they can be intimidated and bow to those intimidations. And that was not the case. We were just let down by our own state security sector of government, who actually allowed the situation in South Africa to get out of hand for almost a week. And the biggest question that one would ask even now would be that, are we indeed safe in South Africa if we've got this kind of state security situation? I've been following the discussions that are being conducted by the Human Rights Commission of South Africa. And for me, that exposes how weak the security cluster of South Africa is, and if government is serious about protecting the infrastructure, protecting the citizens, and indeed ensuring that everybody feels safe, I would expect the government to be doing something better that will guarantee the safety of all of us.
Yeah, it's quite important, I suppose. That's the next important event that I wanted to segue to. And as you've put it very well, Levi, it speaks of the safeguarding of the integrity and security of this nation with what has happened and, of course, decisions that were later taken by the president. For example, the cabinet reshuffle. Does it give you a sense of him cleaning house, and whether or not the fact that he's now taken the political responsibility of the spies under his office is a step in the right direction? We'll unpack those a little bit more when we continue. What have been the highlights for you politically for the year 2021, and what does that represent for you and as far as where the nation is going? Many saying 2021 was the year in which the South African Constitution trumped politics with the arrest of one of the presidents who actually was looking over those institutions. Right, let's hear your views. 072-110-5584. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back. The year 2021 in politics. What were the highlights and what do they represent, and what are we likely to see in the coming year 2022 from those developments? Rebone Tau, Levy Ndou, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke and Professor Dirk Kotze with us tonight, and taking your views on 072-110-5584. Professor Maluleke, let's go back to then what then happened. July unrest costing the country billions, military sent out to bring back the kind of order that we would like to see. Of course, the inability of our security forces to respond became a big question, and we are asking whether this country is able to safeguard the integrity and the security of this nation.
Yeah, of course, all of those questions were raised when it seemed to us that the government had gone AWOL for at least a week or 5 days. We saw the police looking on and not taking any action. And so the questions that Levi was raising about how much the police knew or did not know, whether their inaction was deliberate or they just blinked, and when they opened their eyes, the country was on fire. We will never know that. But I think we have to appreciate that this is a country that has been under pressure, especially the working classes and the poor. They have been available to be used, in inverted commas, in any direction. And I think that the circumstances around the arrest of the former president became the cocktail that enabled an otherwise very restless population in at least 2 of our provinces to get into the kinds of actions that we saw on our television screens. My own argument is that when all is said and done, the people who were looting are wannabe looters. They are caricatures of a project of looting that has been ongoing for some time in the country, which is why we have had the Zondo Commission, the other big happening of this year. So we saw these people looting shops, but you could argue that at any given time, there's a lot of looting by white-collar looters in the background in this country. And my fear is that what July showed was that perhaps we are graduating into a situation, as I wrote in a piece just today, where looting becomes a national sport, where, even the poor are going to imitate the big looters, because that's essentially what I think was happening. I mean, I wish, the July incident was just a July incident, and we could just talk about it and say, there were problems, let's make sure it doesn't happen again. But the problem of looting is bigger than what we saw in July. And of course, the security cluster was at 6s and 7s. That did not inspire confidence at all. They couldn't even agree on what to call what was going on. The one minister was pointing a finger at the other minister. And I think the leadership at that point, just the political leadership to help us understand what was going on, was absent.
Yeah. Viva, I mean, what does that represent, as the Prof mentions there? Multiple centers of power politically in the administration of President Cyril Ramaphosa undermining his authority. Is that still a thing? I mean, as you mentioned, you saw a minister publicly deflecting what the president has said about what was going on. But as you watch the Human Rights Commission inquiry, you're finding out that, for example, the Minister of Police didn't know where the police commissioner was. There's an animosity that is existing clearly there that is unexplained at this particular point. Is this an indication really of the networks of political dissent that have always been, even before the incarceration of President Zuma, been a major factor in Ramaphosa administration, still at work?
Well, I think this, for me, characterizes a disorganized state. A disorganized state in the sense that months before a former President Zuma could be arrested, there were talks already, and these talks were coming from within the ruling party. Some prominent members of the ruling party were saying that you dare arrest former President Zuma, there's going to be instability in the country. And that tells you that right within the ruling party itself, they don't speak in unison, or it's actually an exposure of how divided or disorganized the ANC is. And of course, when we've got the ANC that is not united, it has to roll over to the state, because the very same members of the ANC who are not united are the ones that are occupying different and strategic positions in government. But even though you have got a disunited ANC, one would have expected that when one is given a responsibility to run a strategic and very important department, you need a person who is more patriotic, who will ensure that the lives and properties of the state and ordinary citizens are protected. And that was not the case in July. We were all left stranded, not knowing whether this was going to take a month or the whole year. But I also want to agree with Professor Maluleke that the looting in South Africa represents how South Africans are. Our politicians have taught us that you can loot and still become a free person. And that is why even now, after the lootings, we have just heard of few and very few individuals that are arrested. Because in South Africa, there is no consequence management, especially when it comes to corruption and criminal activities. And if this is supposed to be the trend in South Africa, and we don't change our attitude, I think we're actually taking the wrong directions. And those that are given responsibilities to make a difference in South Africa have to stand up and be accounted amongst the few.
Yeah. Rebone, there are those who say, and you tell me your views on this, that President Cyril Ramaphosa inherited a party that is governed by a quid pro quo situation where appointments are made based on factional affiliations and sometimes personal loyalty. Is this a fruit of that?
The reality of the matter, the appointment, fictionalism, you can go back to Polokwane, when some decided to support Zuma for the first time in Polokwane. It was based that some felt that they were not deployed, under President Thabo Mbeki at the time. People like Isma Khashu, for the longest time wanted to become the premier, but because he was not within the course. So the reality of the matter is that deployment will always be, around factionalism of the ANC. I mean, I'll give you an example as we were speaking about the unrest. Look at the reshuffling, first in line in any unrest is the Minister of Police. And the Minister of Police has been retained in his position after the unrest, and only the Minister of Defense was just taken to become the spokesperson. The Minister of State Security was taken to a different portfolio, which is the Department of Public Service. But the reality of the matter, because we know that Begitsa, they've been building up to 2017 conference, was within the faction of Ramaphosa, for 2017. And this also that is at play right now. It's a build-up to the 2022 conference, which is coming up next year, December. So the reality of the matter is also that Ramaphosa, with his current reshuffling, was also managing the dynamics going to the 2022 conference of the ANC.
Prof. Dirk, let's talk about that reshuffle a little bit more. The president deciding to concentrate the political responsibility of the spies under his office. Was that a move indicating a cleanup of some sort?
Yes, that is so, but it's not very unusual. If first of all we must look at intelligence. It's not one service. There are three services of intelligence. It is military intelligence, the police or crime intelligence, and then national intelligence. This move was specifically about national intelligence. There's the Sydney Mufamadi panel and its report that already proposed moves like this before the event of July and the reshuffling in August. So in a sense, it's actually an implementation of a restructuring of the intelligence services. What we know is that the intelligence services was one of the key elements of President Zuma's sort of network that he developed within the state. It's almost a state capture of his own that he exercised in that way in order to control the intelligence services and at the same time, by extension, the police and to a lesser extent, the military. But the fact that the National Intelligence or State Security as agency is now in the office of the president is being done in many other countries of the world, because state services or state security services or national intelligence is very much linked to the work of the president. When it's a lot of it is done in the form of diplomacy, when there's state visits, when he goes to a major event like or a major meeting, or when he visits other country, he's always briefed by intelligence. When he has to take a position with respect to something like the situation in Mozambique, he's informed by intelligence. When he goes to the African Union and must take a position there with respect to whatever is on the table there, he's in the first instance informed by intelligence and also by Dirk. So intelligence in that sense plays a very important role in international relations, in the work of the president in general, also obviously in terms of domestic matters. But there it is, the question is to what extent is the three services, the intelligence services, be coordinated? And I think this is one of the weaknesses that exist in the past, in the very near past, is that there were actually competition between the different intelligence services and not cooperation. They are jealous about the information that they have. They've become also co-opted into the internal politics of the ANC too very often, and that detracted their their attention away from the real work that they are supposed to do. So I think the closer intelligence becomes, national intelligence becomes to the president's office, the closer he can manage it ultimately, in order to prevent it from becoming politicized in terms of the factions that you are talking about.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we talk a little bit more, of course, of the bigger issues that have also emerged, including the fact that 300 lives were lost and revealing some deepening tensions around race in the country. We'll unpack that a little bit more when we continue. What were the highlights for you in politics in 2021, and what do they represent? Let's get your views tonight. 072-110. Prof. Tinyiko, let's go back to that question, as you mentioned, of the unrest and the looting, but also the question of the lives that have been lost. Many are asking questions about whether or not we are too silent about those lives that were lost. It was a big political thing, majority of them being black lives, showing deepening tensions racially in the country. Is it an indication of a failed social cohesion project, or what do you call it, reconciliation project, as we come from December 16th?
Yeah, the loss of lives is certainly something that should be regretted deeply, and a lot more should have been done and should be said about that. The last I checked, it was 330-something people who lost their lives in incidents related to the July unrest. That's a lot of people to lose. And if you want, you can add to that the candidate councillors that were shot dead and people who were killed that was related to the elections this year, not to speak of such whistleblowers as Babita Diokaran, who also was gunned down. So there is a sense in which we should not get used to loss of life. We should not reach a stage as a country where we accept that lives will be lost and life will go on. We should draw a line in the sand and make a lot of fuss about loss of life. Just like we saw in 2020 with the people that died in incidents that alleged that either the army or the police were involved. So my fear is that this is occurring so frequently that we are getting used to it, and we don't make much hue and cry about it. But it is a serious it's a serious situation in which we as a country are finding ourselves. Some people argue that from the kind of corruption levels that we have, we might move to a mafia state kind of situation, or a situation where lives will be so cheap that people who stand in the way or even onlookers and bystanders will get killed. And I fear that we are slowly moving into that territory if something is not done and done urgently.
Yeah. Levi, I mean, some are questioning whether we are up to the task of reconciling the nation and promoting the agenda of social cohesion, particularly if you look at the racial tensions in KwaZulu-Natal, and if you have been watching that Human Rights Commission and what's coming out of there.
Well, I think there is a clear project on the part of government to ensure that we are able to come together and build one nation. This is the project that government has started many, many years ago. And the unfortunate part is that we still have instances or situations where certain events would always be drifting us apart. And that is quite unfortunate. But also at the same time, you need influential people, and in this instance, I will refer to politicians, who should always be at the forefront in ensuring that the project of bringing all South Africans together and build one nation is being realized. The unfortunate part is that you would still get some of the political leaders who would make statements which, instead of uniting the nation, would always be drifting South Africans apart. And they know that only with their voice, they can still be able to make a difference. If there is something that we have to achieve as a nation, is to ensure that we all come together and become one and put all our differences aside and find ways and means to work together in building a one united South Africa. It's indeed not an easy thing to do, but we have it just in front of us, and all of us are supposed to make it work. But our leaders have to play a very crucial role, in my view, in ensuring that indeed we become united and we can still be successful.
Yeah. Rebone, the handling of the loss of lives in this particular unrest, not only that, but I suppose the RET faction in KwaZulu-Natal is very, very strong, and the lack, I suppose, of the urgency with which the president, for example, responded to this. I mean, eventually went to KwaZulu-Natal. He didn't walk all the streets. He walked some of the streets. There was also this fear that he will be embarrassed if he goes to certain places. Did this in a way lose in the favor and the support of the people of KwaZulu-Natal?
I think the reality of the matter that you must also talk about, if you look at KZN, and I always say to people that the first time the ANC won outright in KZN, it was 2009 elections, because in 2004, the ANC did not get 50+1. So in 2009 elections, when Zuma was then the president of the ANC, that's when the ANC started growing in the province. And we saw the decline in 2019. You know? So already there's always been that tribal cult that even people try and tiptoe around it also within the ANC and say there's no tribal politics within the party. But the decline has shown. And in years, President Zuma, President Ramaphosa has been trying, you know, to go to KZN to try and win over even the RET forces within KZN. And what is interesting, I mean, the PEC at some point, you know, they were not really entertaining the issue of President Zuma, you know, and until we started seeing on the ground, you know, I remember at one point when Sitre Zigalala went to the court, you know, on this issue of the arms deal, when the PEC took a decision to support Jacob Zuma in their individual capacities, because remember that also the issue of hands off the ANC, and he said people must not go to the court wearing ANC regalia. but you saw members of the ANC on the ground, insulting Sitlezi Galala, insulting Mdumiseni Ntili, saying that they are sellouts, they're not standing with President Zuma. And that then you started seeing the shift, and obviously also they are also preparing for the provincial conference, which is also going to be highly contested within their own internal dynamics within the province. And just to add one thing on the racial issue, which also is another highlight that we're forgetting. What happened in the Free State in Senegal, you remember, when those white farmers were killed, and then you had them going to court or the police station over even throwing over a police buggy. It shows that the racial issues in this country have just been put under the carpet post-1994. Recently in Parliament, we had the issue of the land, whether the land should be taken without compensation or the nil compensation. And we saw also parties divided, but we know that the Front Plus stood their position, the DA stood their positions, and we saw the black parties also divided. But the racial issues in this country are real, alive, and as long as we still have, even today, some white people still using the K word, it shows that more needs to be done. But also some have argued that how do you forgive people who have never asked for forgiveness? So really a lot needs to be done to make sure that this country is united. But the reality of the matter is that President Ramaphosa continues to try and also go to KZN and consolidate as it goes to 2022.
Yeah. Prof. Kotze, others are saying we suffered the worst violence, in a sense, since the 90s during the July unrest, and there's not enough noise being made about 300 lives that have been lost. But others are even begin to ask the question whether or not South Africa has become a failed state where the systems are not working, the administrative nature of the state is not working, the ecosystem is just failing at this point to even protect the lives of the people of this country. Is that taking it too far?
Yeah, I won't say South Africa is a failed state or is very close to being a failed state or is even going in the direction of a failed state. A failed state is a state like Somalia. Is a failed state is what is referred to as South Sudan. Is countries that are far removed from the situation in South Africa. If you drive from Pretoria to OR Tambo or from the N1 from Pretoria or lower down to Cape Town, is that a failed state? So I would be very cautious to make sort of these sweeping statements. Yeah. Now,
what do you call a state where the law enforcement agencies have no capacity to handle a situation like a civil unrest?
Well, a state is not only determined by its police, for example, and the police is not completely incapacitated. Yes, there were events like in July where they completely failed in order to manage that situation. When the military went in, it changed quite dramatically. So I think we should not overgeneralize. The fact that when there was a call a few weeks later on to have a repeat of what happened then, nothing happened. So the point is, I would like to see, to say South Africa is a very multiplicit a country with multiple power centers of power, with multiple elements of constituting a state. A state is not only about security. A state is about also the function of different elements. We talked earlier on about, for example, the Constitutional Court or the judiciary in general. Does it mean that they have failed, that they cannot do their work, that they cannot uphold the rule of law in South Africa? I don't think anyone can say that. There is criticism about many aspects of the judiciary. The same about, for example, Parliament. I mean, Parliament is not a non-entity. It's not something that is dysfunctional. You can say, yes, they don't do enough, but it is not as if it is sort of in limbo, as if it is paralyzed, as if there is just nothing is happening. With our economy, which is part of the state, is that typical of a situation where you cannot anymore sustain yourself? You cannot, the agriculture, we cannot feed ourselves. We don't have enough food production. Again, it's not that of a failed state. So I think we have to be exceptionally careful to make sort of sweeping statements that are just not supported by facts.
Professor Dirk Kotze, Rebone Tau, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, and Levy Ndou staying with us. We'll wrap up the conversation when we continue next. Of course, talk about what Rebone has already mentioned, elections, and whether or not that is an indication of what is to come, at least in the short term. The nation showing their lack of support for the ANC in local municipalities. Let's continue in a moment. What have been the political highlights for you for 2021? Send those through 072-110-5584 or tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Welcome back. You're live and in focus tonight, and we are looking at the politics of 2021, some of the highlights and what they represent. Sit with our panel tonight. Prof. Tinyiko, the networks of corruption and that were present, I suppose, in the last decade or so, are still showing signs that they are there and certainly are willing to fight back. Does this still pose a question of a challenge, an existential challenge, certainly for the ANC? And can the party defeat this from within? I mean, if you look at the local government elections and those outcomes, one would say, I suppose, a large majority of the electorate believes that they won't be able to defeat them from within. And some chose to sit back and do nothing and not participate, while others changed their vote.
The ANC and the elections. I don't think these elections were bad only for the ANC. I think we make a mistake when we read the recent elections in terms of the ANC versus the rest. Of course, the truth is that the ANC for the first time did not make the 50+1% mark. But every political party has lost in these elections. There were more people staying away from these elections than those who voted. That is the fact of the matter, and everyone was hurt. The ANC, being the biggest, was hurt most than everyone. So when we look for the reasons for what has happened on November 1, we must not read those reasons merely by talking about the ANC as if the ANC alone was the loser here, even though they may be the biggest loser. That's the first thing I want to say. Now, The corruption networks obviously are still alive, and we saw even in the evidence that was surfacing before the Zondo Commission that was the case. But I think perhaps sometimes we should put more emphasis on the efforts that have been made to deal with corruption, one of them being the Zondo Commission. It's a very important attempt, not just by the ANC, but by government and by the country, to look corruption in the eye and deal with it. I think we should also do more to recognize those who fight corruption, including those who die for fighting corruption. I've already mentioned Babita. And I think when we begin to do this, it will become a very important part of our fight against corruption. Because I think sometimes the corrupt hog the headlines and they preoccupy us more than the people who are trying to fight against corruption. And I think we should try to strike a balance between that. But certainly the networks of corruption are still there, and I think the ANC has a big job to deal with the perception that corruption emanates from them. And of course, every opposition party during the election made that point or communicated that message. And I think the ANC does have a big role to play if corruption is going to be rooted out in this country, simply because they are the ruling party, but also because many of the problems of corruption that we saw in the Zondo Commission point the finger back at the ANC.
Yeah, most of the opposition parties, including the smaller parties, are showing, Levi, that they are willing more than anything else to rally around each other to remove the ANC from power. Well, certainly ANC no longer enjoying that level and degree of electoral confidence, at least in the short term, considering, as Prof. Tinyiko Maluleke says, all the other factors that come with this election, including the fact that there is a pandemic that is going on and people generally did not show up in numbers. But that gathering of opposition political parties and smaller parties against the ANC, is that indicative of what the politics of the country will be going forward, even looking at the elections in 2024?
Well, I think the different political parties have to take advantage of the challenges facing the ANC. When you have the ANC that is not united, divided as it is, you take advantage of ensuring that indeed they do not get the majority which they've been enjoying. But another element that I think we need to look at here is that the smaller parties also want to benefit as individual parties from these coalitions. It is not mainly about serving the people only and isolating the ANC. It's also about themselves and having positions so that they are able to build their own personal profiles. But the coming together of different political parties have got their own disadvantages. The disadvantages being that smaller parties that are given responsibilities somewhere, their members might focus mainly on